Have you ever pictured this? You're 75 years old, sitting alone on the cold wooden bench of a rest stop off the highway, surrounded by the roar of passing trucks, the wind whipping against your face and your family's car. The people you trusted most has long since disappeared from view. They're not stuck in traffic. They didn't just run to get gas and come back. They didn't get lost. They left, on purpose. That day, late autumn winds lashed against my trembling hands. I remember I was wearing the navy blue cardigan my daughter-in-law had given me last Christmas. The soft wool had once felt warm, but today every fiber against my skin felt like a cruel reminder that the person who gifted it had abandoned me less than 10 minutes ago. I sat there clutching my handbag tightly to my side like a reflex. Inside it, a wallet, a few coins, my phone, and a handful of important documents I never imagined I'd need in a moment like this. Each time I looked up at the endless stream of cars, I felt smaller, more out of place, like a forgotten grain of sand in a desert of asphalt. When I realized the truth that they weren't coming back, I didn't cry. Strange, isn't it? People expect betrayal to bring tears. But what flooded through me instead was an icy chill racing down my spine, like someone had just dumped a bucket of ice water over my soul. Maybe it was because I knew this wasn't an accident. It was a decision, a plan. And I was the central character, but not in some heartwarming family drama. I was in a carefully scripted play designed to push an old woman to the edge. Let me tell you this now before we go any further. I got my revenge. I did something that would shock some people, make others cheer, and maybe earn a few frowns. I sold the house they were living in. Sold it all. Sold it while they were still laughing, still believing I would just sit quietly and swallow the humiliation. And trust me, none of them saw it coming. Not one. Now you might be asking, how did she do it? You can't just decide to sell a house like that. What about the paperwork? The law? You're right. In America, selling a house is no simple matter. But that's exactly what makes this story worth telling, because I, a woman in her mid-70s, used the law itself to protect myself and turn the tables. But before I walk you through exactly how I did it, you need to understand how I ended up abandoned on the side of a highway. You need to see the full picture, the sleepless nights I spent caring for them when they were sick, the times I drained my retirement savings to cover the mortgage payments they couldn't manage. You need to see every fragment of trust I gave them, so you can understand how those very pieces were shattered, ground into dust, and left behind somewhere along Interstate 75. I won't pretend I was a saint. I won't claim I never argued with them. Every American family has its conflicts about money, about time, about generational differences. But there's a line you believe family will never cross. They crossed it, and once they did, there was no going back. The story began on a Saturday morning when we were driving from Ohio to Florida. It was supposed to be a family bonding trip, a chance for me to relax and get a change of scenery. I believed them. I got into that silver SUV with a heart full of hope. But when it pulled off into a rest stop in Tennessee, everything changed. Now you understand why I'm here telling this story. Not to complain, not to ask for pity. But so you, whoever you are, wherever you are, will understand that sometimes betrayal doesn't come from strangers. It comes from the very people you've handed the house keys to shared Thanksgiving dinner with and mailed handwritten Christmas cards to every year. And when that happens, you have two choices. One, bow your head, shrink into yourself, accept your role as the victim. Or two, stand up, take back control, and show them you are not easy prey. I chose the second. And the story of how I sold their house, the house they thought was untouchable, is my answer to that freezing morning at the rest stop. Are you ready to hear the rest? Because this is only the beginning. My name is Margaret Louise Parker, 75 years old, living in a small suburban town outside Columbus, Ohio. People often say, Ohio in the fall looks like a painting, fiery red maple leaves, gentle breezes, and endless tree-lined roads. I loved this place, loved the mornings spent by the window with a cup of coffee reading the newspaper and watching neighbors walk their dogs. But ever since my husband passed away 8 years ago, our 3-bedroom home felt too big and far too quiet. My son Michael was the only one left in the family who lived anywhere near me. He got married, then moved to Nashville, Tennessee, almost a 6-hour drive away. We still kept in touch, or at least that's what I thought. Michael was always the son I was proud of, hardworking, good-humored, and caring toward his mother. In the years right after his father's death, he'd call, often send me pictures of the kids, and invite me to visit. But over the past few years, the calls became fewer. Whenever I mentioned visiting, the answer was usually, "Mom, we're so busy. We'll plan it when we can, okay?" So when Michael called one October afternoon and suggested I join his family on a trip from Ohio down to Florida, I was genuinely surprised. "Mom, we're planning to drive down to Florida for a few days. On the way, we'll swing by Nashville to pick you up. Then we can all go together. It's been a long time since we had a family trip." I smiled, my heart filling with hope. A road trip, the kind American families take to bond again. I pictured us singing along to the radio, passing around bags of snacks, stopping at small roadside diners to enjoy hot pies fresh from the oven. On the morning of departure, I packed carefully a small suitcase with a few comfortable outfits, my favorite sneakers, and a knitted scarf I'd made myself. I also brought a jar of homemade peach jam for the kids and a box of butter cookies. Michael always said they tasted just like the ones from New York. When Michael's silver SUV pulled up in front of my house, my heart felt young again. Inside the car were Michael, his wife Emily, and their 2 children, Nathan, 14, and Lily, 11. Nathan was in the back seat, eyes glued to his Nintendo Switch, while Lily smiled and waved at me. "Grandma, I saved the seat next to me for you," Lily chirped as I opened the door. I settled into the seat, buckled up, and the car rolled forward. Everything felt so warm in that moment. Emily turned and asked if I preferred coffee or tea while Michael talked about the stops he'd planned: a national park in Georgia, a small town famous for pecan pie, and a quiet beach near Jacksonville. We put on some country music, my favorite, and Michael's too, and sang along to a few songs. Lily tried to mimic the singer's voice, making us laugh, while Nathan occasionally looked up to tease his sister. At lunchtime, we stopped at a roadside diner. The smell of bacon-fresh coffee and thick pancakes brought me right back to my younger years. Michael sat across from me talking about his new job, while Emily discussed plans to remodel their kitchen. I listened, nodding quietly, grateful to be in this moment with them. But in between the laughter, I caught fleeting glances exchanged between Michael and Emily. Quick, subtle, yet noticeable. At the time, I thought perhaps they were talking about something: personal work or Nathan's schooling. I didn't ask. I didn't want to intrude. The trip went on, and I began noticing other little things. Emily was constantly texting sometimes, leaning in to whisper to Michael. Nathan barely spoke to me at all, and while Lily was still friendly, she too became absorbed in her phone. I told myself, it's okay. Kids these days are different from when I was young. What matters is that we're still together. That night we stayed at a small roadside motel. Michael handed me a key to my own room. "Get some rest, Mom. We'll head out early tomorrow." I smiled, not knowing this would be one of the last nights I'd sleep without worrying about what tomorrow might bring. The next morning, the sky was gray, and light rain fell. We drove along endless stretches of road lined with red and gold autumn leaves. The car was quieter than the day before. Emily focused on her phone. Michael drove silently, and the kids were lost in their screens. As we neared Tennessee, Michael suddenly said, "Mom, I think we'll stop at the next rest area for some coffee and a bathroom break. Then we'll drive straight to the next stop." I nodded without a trace of suspicion. It seemed like any other quick stop on a family road trip. When the SUV pulled into the rest area, I saw rows of wooden benches, a small convenience store, and a few trucks parked nearby. The smell of coffee and donuts drifted out of the store, mingling with the faint scent of gasoline. I got out, stretched my legs, and took a deep breath. Michael said he'd grab coffee for me. Emily and the kids followed him inside. I chose a bench outside, watching the trees sway gently in the wind. At that moment, I had no idea that the peace I was feeling was only the surface. A thin, sweet shell hiding what was about to happen. Because soon, that shell would be ripped away, and I would see clearly that this so-called family bonding trip had never truly been what they claimed it to be. The autumn air in Tennessee has a very particular scent, cool and dry, with a faint trace of pine from the forest behind the rest area. I sat on a wooden bench under the porch, my hands clasped together, eyes following the heavy trucks slowly pulling in and out of the lot. Michael had said he'd get me a cup of hot black coffee, the kind you like, and he'd even smiled the kind of smile that warmed me inside. Emily and the kids had gone into the convenience store too, probably to grab some snacks for the long drive. I thought I'd only be waiting a few minutes. But then, 10 minutes passed. I looked around. No Michael, no Emily, no kids. Maybe the store's crowded, I told myself. They're probably standing in line. Another 5 minutes went by, still no one. I stood up and walked inside. The convenience store was tiny, just one coffee counter, a few snack shelves, and a young cashier glued to his phone. I walked around, then asked, "Did you see a tall man, brown hair, blue jacket, with a woman and 2 kids come in here?" The young man looked up, thought for a moment, then nodded. "Oh, yeah, I saw them get some coffee and a few things, then head out about 10 minutes ago." I froze. "Head out?" I asked. "You mean?" "They left. Yeah. I saw them go out to the parking lot. Pretty sure they drove off." The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. The air seemed to thicken, making it hard to breathe. My heart started pounding, part shock, part confusion. I rushed outside, scanning the lot. The silver SUV, the car carrying my family and all my belongings, was gone. For the first few seconds, I refused to believe my eyes. I stood frozen, hoping they'd just parked somewhere out of view. I walked the lot, my gaze darting everywhere, but saw nothing except unfamiliar cars. Then a thought crept in. Maybe Michael had to move the car for some emergency. But if that were true, why didn't they leave someone to wait for me? Why didn't they send a text, make a quick call? I pulled out my phone. No new messages. I called Michael. It rang, then went to voicemail. I left a short message, my voice trembling. "Michael, I'm at the rest area. Where are you? Call me back right now." I tried Emily. Straight to voicemail. I texted them both. "I'm still at the rest area. Where are you?" No reply. The wind grew colder. I pulled my navy cardigan tight around me, but it didn't stop the shiver. Trucks kept coming and going, drivers passing by without a glance. I felt like an object someone had forgotten to take home. 30 minutes passed. I called again. No answer. An hour. Still silence. My confusion shifted toward panic. I began to imagine the worst: abandonment, an accident, or some other reason I wasn't ready to name. I paced in front of the store, hoping to see the silver SUV return. Instead, the sun dipped lower, tree shadows stretched long across the pavement, and the temperature dropped. About 2 hours later, a middle-aged woman in a denim jacket approached. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. I hesitated, then told her the short version: my son and his family had left. I couldn't reach them. Her eyes flickered with shock, then softened into sympathy. "Wait here, let me use my phone." She handed me a hot coffee from the store and sat beside me. While I tried to swallow the warmth, she called Michael's number, then Emily's. No answer. "Do you have anyone else to call, friends, relatives?" she asked. I shook my head. Most of my family lived far away, and nearly all my contact went through Michael. She told me her name was Carol, and that she lived in a town more than 30 miles from here. She offered to take me to her home for the night, or at least to the nearest police station to file a report. At first, I wanted to refuse. Part pride, I didn't want to admit to a stranger that my own family had just abandoned me. But as I looked around and saw the golden dusk swallowing the rest area, I knew I had no choice. On the way to the police station, I sat in silence, eyes fixed on the window, but not seeing anything. In my mind, images played on repeat: Michael's smile that morning, Emily's sidelong glance at the diner yesterday, the cold, empty space in the parking lot where the SUV had been. At the station, a young officer took my statement asking for the license plate and descriptions. When I said they were my immediate family, he looked slightly taken aback. But he kept a professional tone: "Mrs. Parker, if this is a civil matter, we can't force them to come back. But we'll log the report and help connect you to any necessary services." I nodded, thanked him. The answer was both correct and cruel. In America, adults can go wherever they choose, and leaving someone at a rest stop isn't necessarily a crime unless there's immediate danger or the abandoned person is incapable of self-care. But even if the law didn't call it a crime, my heart knew exactly what it was: betrayal, and not a spur-of-the-moment act, but a planned decision. That night, Carol brought me to her home, a small, warm house filled with the smell of baking apple pie. She set me up on the couch in the living room, handed me a thick blanket. As I lay there staring at the ceiling, I couldn't sleep. Questions looped in my mind. Where are they now? Why did they do it? How long had they been planning this? And then another question began to form slowly. At first, then growing louder. What am I going to do next? I didn't know it then. But in that strange, yet warm living room, the seed of a plan for retribution had begun to sprout. Because if they could leave me by the roadside like an old piece of luggage, then I could take back what was mine and make sure they understood that at 75 years old, I could still turn the game around. That night, as I lay on the couch in Carol's living room, the ticking of the wall clock seemed to punctuate each returning memory. Every sound was like a breadcrumb leading me back to the past, so vivid, it felt as if I were living it all over again. I gave birth to Michael in the winter of 1977 at a small hospital in Columbus, Ohio. At the time, Richard and I had been married for only 2 years. We weren't wealthy, but we were both hard workers, me as a nurse in a private clinic, Richard as an air conditioning repairman. From the moment Michael arrived, I placed every priority I had on my son. I remember winter nights when snow fell thick outside, and Michael burned with fever. I'd wrap him in blankets, press a warm cloth to his forehead, and hum lullabies in the dark. I remember sweltering summer afternoons spent in the backyard pitching baseball after baseball to him, until my back ached and sweat soaked through my shirt. When Michael was only 14, Richard died of a sudden heart attack. My world collapsed. I lost my partner. Michael lost the only father he'd ever known. But I knew I couldn't fall apart. He needed me more than ever. I took extra night shifts at the clinic and a part-time weekend job at a grocery store. I can't count the times I came home just before dawn, feet swollen and aching, only to get up a few hours later to make Michael breakfast before school. I was determined that he would never feel deprived financially or emotionally. Michael did well in school, but wanted to join every extracurricular: baseball, the marching band, the science club. All of it cost money. I sold my wedding ring to pay for uniforms and instruments. I told him a ring was just an object, but his dreams were priceless. When Michael was accepted to a private university out of state, I did what so many single mothers in America do: pulled a large chunk from my retirement savings and refinanced the house to cover tuition. I knew it meant a harder old age for me, but when I saw the pride in his eyes on move-in day, I believed I'd done the right thing. After graduation, Michael started working and eventually married Emily. The wedding was in Nashville, and I paid for the entire venue, the flowers, and the reception, even though it meant taking out a personal loan. I thought, my son is starting his new life. I want him to start it without worries. But just a few years later, Michael called, his voice tense. "Mom, we're having some financial trouble. Could I borrow some money to catch up on the mortgage?" I didn't hesitate. I sold my old car, used the money along with what little I'd saved, and sent it to him. I walked to the grocery store or caught rides with neighbors when I needed to shop. I told myself, it's fine, I'm still healthy, still able to work. But one time quickly turned into many times. When Emily had Nathan, I paid for hospital costs beyond what insurance covered. When they wanted to remodel the kitchen, I emptied my emergency fund. When they decided to buy a new SUV, I co-signed the loan. Each time Michael promised to pay me back. But I never asked, partly because I trusted he would, partly because I didn't want to burden him. Then 3 years ago, I slipped in the bathroom and broke my hip. The surgery and rehab took months. Michael and Emily visited a few times, but most of my hospital days were spent with only the nurses for company. It was neighbors and friends who picked me up when I was discharged. I began to feel an invisible wall growing between me and my son's family. The calls became fewer, the visits shorter. I kept telling myself they were busy with work and the kids, but deep down I knew something was wrong. One memory is still etched sharply in my mind. Last year at Thanksgiving, I prepared the full traditional dinner: turkey, mashed potatoes, pumpkin pie, and invited Michael's family. I spent a week planning 2 days cooking. Right at mealtime, Michael called. "Mom, something came up. We can't make it." "I'm sorry." I sat alone at the long dining table staring at the golden roast turkey no one would touch. I remember quietly taking a picture not to post but to remind myself that I had tried even if no one appreciated it. Small moments piled up into a deep fracture. I still loved my son, but I began to see that my love and sacrifice had been taken for granted. I didn't want to think ill of them, but too often I felt I was no longer mom in their eyes, just a financial safety net, a resource they believed would always be there. And then, this road trip came along. I hoped it would heal the rift. I believed it would be a chance to laugh, to share, to find our way back to each other. Instead, it became the final proof they were willing to leave me behind, in both the literal and figurative sense. Looking back now, I understand what happened at the rest stop wasn't an accident or a moment of poor judgment. It was the final drop in a long, overflowing history of being overlooked, used, and dismissed. And if anyone ever asks why I did what I'm about to do, sell the house they live in, this is the answer. Not because of one act of betrayal, but to put an end to an entire history of injustice that had gone on far too long. Because sometimes to save yourself, you have to step out of the role others have assigned to you. And for me, that meant no longer being the mother who always sacrifices, but becoming the woman who protects herself, even if it shocks the people who never thought she would. The next morning, I woke up on Carol's couch, feeling as if I had just stepped out of a nightmare. But unlike bad dreams this time, I knew this was reality. Carol had made breakfast, toast, fried eggs, and a steaming cup of coffee. She sat across from me quiet for a moment before gently asking, "Do you think they'll come back for you?" I lowered my gaze, watching the little swirls on the coffee's surface. I wanted to say yes, but a voice in my head whispered, "No, Margaret, they're not coming back." After breakfast, I asked Carol to drive me to a phone store so I could charge my phone. When it finally powered on, I saw 3 new messages, all from Michael. But instead of apologies or explanations, their content chilled me to the bone. "Mom, I think you should stay with friends for a while. This is best for everyone. You know, the house in Columbus is too big and expensive for you. Maybe you should consider selling it. If you want, Emily and I can help you handle the paperwork." I read them over and over, each word like a small, deliberate cut. In that moment, all the pieces snapped together into a single, ugly picture. So leaving me at the rest stop wasn't just careless, it was a step in a bigger plan. A plan to push me out of my own life. I thought back to the times Michael had hinted, "Mom, that house is way too big for you. Why keep so many empty rooms when you're alone?" I'd always assumed it was concern. Now I saw the truth. They wanted the house. A 3-bedroom home with a large yard in a safe neighborhood worth no less than $500,000 on the market. I remembered Emily's casual questions about the deed, the knowing glances exchanged at the diner, even the time Nathan had blurted out, "Who's Mom going to live with when she needs care?" None of it was random anymore. There's a saying we have in America: when people show you who they are, believe them the first time. I had ignored too many signs, convincing myself I was being paranoid, but not anymore. The grief inside me began to shift. It was no longer the cold, helpless numbness I'd felt at the rest. Stop, it was something else. Hotter, sharper. It was resolve. I knew I couldn't let this slide. If I stayed silent, they would keep steering my life, taking what I'd spent a lifetime building. Worse, they'd believe that how they treated me was perfectly acceptable. That afternoon, when Carol asked what I planned to do next, I smiled for the first time since being left behind. "I'm going home," I said. But not to sit quietly. I had spent nearly half a century building my life, raising my son, paying off that mortgage, keeping that home intact. If they wanted to play dirty to take it from me, I'd use the law to take back control. In my mind, the first steps of a plan were already forming. A plan not to cause physical harm or lash out blindly, but to send a clear message: I am not someone you can push to the curb. That night, I reopened Michael's messages, saving every single one. I created a folder just for them. I wrote down everything that had happened from the moment we set off to the rest stop to receiving those texts. We Americans believe in the value of evidence, and I knew that if this story went further, every small detail could matter. That night, I researched property laws in both Ohio and Tennessee, and there it was: my Columbus house was in my name alone. No co-signer, no co-owner. which meant the decision was entirely mine. I no longer saw myself as a 75-year-old woman abandoned by the roadside. I saw myself as the rightful owner of a valuable asset, someone with the sole power to decide its fate. And one thought rang clear in my mind. If they want this house so badly, then I will be the one to decide what happens to it, not them. In that moment, I knew the story had shifted. From here on, I would no longer be the passive character in their script. I would be the one holding the pen, writing the next chapter. 3 days after leaving Carol's house, I returned to Columbus. The taxi dropped me off at the front gate, and I stood there for a long while, looking at the home that had been part of me for nearly half my life. The brown shingled roof, the white wooden porch, and the rose bushes in the yard, all unchanged. But to me, it was no longer a home the way it once had been. When I stepped inside, I opened every window to let the light pour in. There was no laughter, no one calling Mom from the kitchen or the living room. This silence wasn't peace, it was a void. And I knew it was time to turn that void into opportunity. The next morning, I called a lawyer named Robert Jenkins, a man a friend had once recommended when I needed estate planning advice years ago. Robert was the quintessential American type, direct, practical, and deeply committed to the word legal. "Margaret, it's been a while." "What brings you to my office today?" he asked once we sat down. I told him everything from being left at the rest stop to the text messages about how I should sell the house. Robert sat quietly listening, jotting down the occasional note. When I finished, he nodded. "The house is in your name only, correct?" "Yes." "Then you have the full legal right to sell without anyone's consent. As long as the process follows the law, they can't sue you for it." Hearing those words felt like lifting 100-pound weight from my chest. From that moment on, it was just a matter of time and resolve. Robert laid out the steps. Determine market value. He contacted a real estate agency for an appraisal. Prepare the paperwork, the deed tax records, and any related documents. List quietly, put the house on the market without broadcasting it, showing only to serious buyers. I signed with a real estate agent named Sarah Collins. Sarah was in her 40s, sharp, quick, and discreet. She immediately understood I wanted the sale to be both fast and quiet. "We'll handle this like a precision surgery," she joked. "Only the potential buyers and your lawyer will know until it's done." For the next 2 weeks, I lived as if running a covert operation. Sarah scheduled showings only at times I knew Michael and Emily wouldn't stop by, which in truth they hadn't done once since the trip. The first potential buyers were a young couple from Cincinnati, looking for a long-term home. They loved it from the moment they stepped into the living room. Sarah guided them through each room while I stood quietly listening to their compliments about the beautiful light and thinking, at least this house will belong to someone who values it. After a few rounds of negotiation, we settled on a price $20,000 higher than the initial estimate. Robert immediately began drafting the sale contract. I signed my name each stroke of the pen, as decisive as cutting the rope that had bound me to the past. Every step was legal and transparent, from the appraisal to the inspection to the deed transfer at the notary's office. There wasn't a single loophole Michael or Emily could use against me. On the day of closing, I locked the door one last time. My hand brushed over the wood, but my eyes stayed dry. I'd already shed enough tears for this house, not for the bricks and shingles, but for the people who once filled it. I handed the keys to Sarah, then walked away with the calm satisfaction of someone who had completed an important mission. That afternoon, I transferred the sale proceeds into a new bank account under my name alone. No one but Robert and I knew about it. Part of it went toward a small apartment downtown, close enough to walk to the cafe, the library, and the grocery store. The rest I put into savings set aside for trips I'd always dreamed of taking. I didn't call Michael to tell him. I didn't send an email. I didn't leave a note. I wanted him to discover it himself when he returned to Columbus and found that nothing was the same. I knew that moment would shock him, maybe even anger him. But I also knew this time everything was firmly within the law. No one could take away my right or turn back the clock. There's a saying, living well is the best revenge. I believe that. But for me, living well this time also meant reclaiming the control they thought I'd lost. Selling the house wasn't just a transaction. It was a declaration: I decide my fate, no one else. and that feeling was sweeter than any victory I'd ever had. 2 months after I left the house in Columbus, winter had settled over Ohio. Bare tree branches stood still under a slate-gray sky, and cold gusts swept through the quiet streets. I was living in my new downtown apartment just 1 block from my favorite coffee shop. Life felt lighter, simpler, and no longer haunted by old shadows. Then one Saturday morning, my phone rang. The caller ID lit up with a name I hadn't seen in weeks. Michael. I stared at the screen for a few seconds before answering. Mom, what is going on? His voice snapped the moment I said hello. What do you mean? I replied calmly. The house I just got back to Columbus, and there's some stranger living in it. They said they bought it from you. Did you sell the house? I paused for a moment before saying, yes, I sold it. On the other end, I could hear his breathing quicken. Then Emily's sharper voice cut in. How could you do that? That was the family home. We were planning to move back in. I smiled, though they couldn't see it. Funny. You call it the family home, yet you left me stranded on the side of a highway. What kind of family does that? My words landed like a spark in dry brush. Michael began protesting, his tone rising. You misunderstood. What happened at the rest stop? It was an accident. I cut him off, my voice now like a blade. An accident. Michael, you left me there for hours without a single call or text. Then the very next day you told me I should sell the house. Don't lie to me. That afternoon they came to see me in person. When I opened the door, Michael stood there, his face a mix of anger and confusion. Emily was beside him, arms crossed, while Nathan and Lily lingered behind, looking uncertain. I invited them into the living room, but no one sat down. Michael started right away. Mom, I don't know why you think we were trying to hurt you. We just wanted you to live more comfortably. That house was too big and too expensive. I met his eyes. Comfortably. By leaving me at an empty rest stop, by forcing a stranger to drive me to the police station. Is that your definition of comfortable? Emily chimed in, her voice lower but edged. You're overreacting. We thought you could stay with friends or with us for a while. The house, we could take better care of it. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because the audacity was absurd. Better care, Emily, that house was bought with my and Michael's father's sweat. I've kept it for over 40 years since his passing. No one but me has the right to decide its fate. The conversation quickly turned into a standoff. Michael accused me of being selfish, of putting personal feelings above the good of the family. I stood, looked at them both, and said firmly, the good of the family is about respect and protecting each other, not draining someone to their last drop. Have you forgotten how many times I paid off your debts, covered hospital bills, paid for your kitchen remodel? I never asked for a cent back. But when I needed you, you abandoned me. No one spoke. Nathan and Lily looked down at the floor. Emily bit her lip, and Michael's face flushed red. I went on. Selling the house was completely legal. The deed was in my name, and I didn't need anyone's permission. I used the money to buy this apartment, and the rest is in savings. I won't depend on you anymore, and I won't let you depend on me. The air in the room turned heavy. Michael tried to speak again, but every argument he reached for crumbled before he could finish. Finally, he sighed, his voice smaller. So, what do you want from us now? I held his gaze for a long moment. I don't want anything. I just want you to understand I'm no longer someone you can abandon or control. If you want to keep this relationship, start by respecting me as a person, not as a wallet. Emily grabbed Michael's hand and pulled him toward the door. Before leaving, she turned and said, You'll regret this. I smiled faintly. Maybe. But at least this decision was mine. The door closed, leaving the apartment quiet again. I sat down, exhaling slowly, not from exhaustion, but from relief. For years I had been on the weaker side, always giving, always enduring. But today I'd taken back the power. And in that moment, I realized you don't have to shout, you don't have to win every argument. As long as you hold the right to decide your own life, you've already won. After the tense confrontation with Michael and Emily, I closed the apartment door, leaned my back against it, and felt something unexpected relief. No more heaviness every time I thought about being abandoned. No more fear that they would find a way to control my life again. My new apartment was on the 7th floor of a small building in downtown Columbus. It wasn't as big as the old house, but everything was just right and warm. The living room was flooded with light from the large window where I could look down at the city park and watch people walking their dogs every morning. I chose a minimalist approach for the furnishings. The weighty relics of the past, the long dining table, the old worn sofa, the glassware cabinet were left behind for the house's new owners. I only brought what I truly needed: a few old family photographs, my favorite books, and the armchair where I liked to read in the evenings. In my first days here, I built a new routine. At dawn, I brewed a cup of black coffee and stood by the window to watch the sun rise. Then I'd head down the street, walking a few blocks to a little coffee shop called Maple and Brew. The place was cozy, filled with the smell of fresh waffles, and the owners, a sweet elderly couple named Linda and Tom, always greeted me with a smile. At first I sat quietly in a corner reading the paper or jotting notes in my journal, but over time I began chatting with the regulars: Ruth, 82, who still walked 3 miles a day, James, a former Marine, and Kate, a young painter who loved to capture the city's skyline. Before long, I realized I had built a new social circle, one not tied to Michael or his family. These were connections born not from blood obligation, but from mutual respect and genuine sharing. I also started joining community activities. One afternoon, while walking through the park, I saw a group planting flowers along the path. They turned out to be Green Hands, a volunteer group dedicated to maintaining the city's green spaces. I watched for a while before a woman in her 50s invited me to join. After just one session, my hands were covered in soil, but my heart felt unusually warm. It was wonderful to contribute even in a small way to the beauty of the city. I signed up as an official member and now spend at least 2 days a week planting trees, pulling weeds, or decorating flower beds for the season. In the winter, when snow began to fall, I joined the nearby First Avenue Church, which ran coat drives for the homeless. I helped sort donations, pack them into bags, and sometimes went out with the team to distribute them. On nights after those activities, I would sit by my window with a mug of hot cocoa, feeling deeply that I was truly living, not just existing in the role of a mother who sacrifices everything for her family. Financially, selling the house gave me a solid foundation. I bought my apartment outright debt-free and still had a sizable savings. Robert, my lawyer, helped me invest safely in bond funds and certificates of deposit. Each month, I had enough income to cover expenses, travel, and give to charity. Best of all, I no longer had to call Michael whenever I needed help. No more waiting for him to decide whether I was worthy of support. This independence was a gift I had given myself. I also allowed myself to enjoy pleasures I'd once set aside. In April, I signed up for a watercolor painting class at the local art center. At first, I thought it would just be for fun, but soon I saw my paintings coming to life. Linda from Maple and Brew even hung one of them on the wall by the coffee counter. In June, I joined a bus tour across state lines with my new friends. We visited small towns, ate at roadside diners, and stayed in family-owned motels. During that trip, I realized I was no longer afraid of being left behind anywhere, because I had learned to stand on my own. Of course, there were still moments when I thought about Michael, once I saw his number flash on my phone. I hesitated, then answered. The conversation was short, just a health check-in. No apology, no argument. I understood our relationship would never be what it was, and I no longer expected it to be. Americans have a saying, you can't start the next chapter if you keep rereading the last one. I had closed that chapter of injustice and opened one filled with freedom choices and small daily joys. This fall, as the leaves turned golden, I stood in the park, camera in hand, capturing sunlight filtering through the branches. I thought about the woman less than a year ago, trembling outside a deserted rest stop, feeling as if the whole world had abandoned her. That woman was gone. In her place was Margaret Parker, 75 years old, independent, confident, and no longer bound by anyone's expectations or exploitation. And when a new friend asked me for my secret to regaining my spirit after such a blow, I simply smiled and said, "Remember, you always have the right to rewrite your own story. And sometimes the best chapter begins right after you think the book is over. One early winter Thursday afternoon, snow fell gently like paper blossoms from the sky. I had just finished a meeting with the volunteer group at First Avenue Church and was on my way home. When I reached the corner near Maple and Brew, I heard someone call my name. Mom. I turned. Michael stood there in a gray sweater, his face more gaunt than the last time I'd seen him. Emily wasn't with him, nor were the kids. It was just the two of us in the cold wind sweeping through the empty street. I didn't move toward him right away. Instead, I waited for him to come closer, keeping a distance that made me feel safe. Mom, can I talk to you for a bit? His voice was lower, nothing like the sharp tone from the day at my apartment. I nodded and gestured toward the cafe. We chose a table by the window where the warm golden light fell over my cappuccino and his cup of black coffee. Michael sat in silence for a few minutes, turning his cup in his hands as if searching for the right words. Finally, he exhaled and said, I've been thinking a lot, about everything, about the rest stop, and about you selling the house. I didn't respond, only took a sip of my coffee. I know. I was wrong, more wrong than I realized. At the time, I thought I was just trying to solve a problem. But I see now. I treated you like a burden, not like the person who raised me. I looked him straight in the eyes. Yes, Michael. And the truth is, I can't forget what happened. I've forgiven many of your mistakes over the years, but this time, I can't just let it go as if it never happened. He lowered his head, fingers laced together. I'm not asking you to forgive me right away. I just want a chance to change. I want to see you talk to you, not for money, not for property, but because you're my mom. I stayed silent for a long moment, letting his words settle. In my mind, old memories surfaced, mornings, walking him to school through the snow afternoons, cheering at his baseball games the day he graduated college when I cried with pride. But intertwined with those was the image of me sitting alone at that rest stop, watching cars rush by, waiting for a call that never came. Michael, I said slowly, I'm not closing the door completely. But I'm not leaving it wide open anymore either. If you truly want to change, you'll have to prove it. Not with promises, but with actions. Consistently, over time. He looked up and nodded. I understand. And you need to know this, I continued. My boundaries are crystal clear. Now I won't let anyone, not even you, decide my life for me. No one has the right to control me with family ties or obligation. This relationship will only exist if there's mutual respect. Michael bit his lip, as if wanting to say more, but stopped. He only nodded again, slower this time, as if committing it to memory. We talked a bit about smaller things, his work, my health, the community projects I was involved in. There were no tears, no dramatic movie scene embrace, just a conversation between two adults with the scars still visible. When we stood to leave, Michael held the door open for me. Before I stepped outside, he said, "Thanks for agreeing to see me." I smiled, not because everything was fine, but because I knew I had held firm to the boundaries I had fought so hard to set. Stay warm, Michael. Stepping out, I felt each snowflake melt against my cheek. The street was still bustling, but inside me there was a quiet calm. I didn't know if Michael would truly change, but I knew that this time, no matter what he did, I would keep the power to decide my own life. Americans have a saying: forgiveness is not forgetting, it's letting go of the hope for a different past. I don't hope for the past to be different. I only hope that my present and future remain in my own hands. And that is the freedom I reclaimed, freedom I will never hand over again. The following spring arrived gently, carrying warm breezes and the scent of magnolias blooming across the city. I stood on the balcony of my apartment, tea in hand, watching the trees along Main Street burst back to life. Every morning I woke to the sound of birdsong, not the pings of demanding or guilt-laden text messages. My life now was simple but complete. I had my own scheduled morning yoga in the park, lunch with friends at Maple and Brew, afternoons with the Green Hands Club planting new flowers. Once a week I went to the library to read or paint watercolors. I no longer lived with the constant worry that someone would take advantage of my kindness. I had learned how to say no when I needed to. And most importantly, I had stopped seeking approval from people unwilling to value me. One Friday evening, I sat with my new friends in the park, listening to a local band perform. Golden lights bathed the small stage, the strum of guitars mingling with the sound of laughter. I realized I was smiling without forcing it. Ruth, a woman a few years older than me, leaned over and asked Margaret, "You seem so different lately. What's your secret?" I sipped my hot cocoa before answering. The secret is knowing how to write your own story, and if needed, being willing to start over. The group went quiet for a moment, then burst into laughter, not because it was funny, but because they all saw a piece of themselves in it. Sometimes I still got messages from Michael. They no longer demanded or pressured. They were just a few lines asking how I was. I didn't know where our relationship would go, but I knew one thing: it would never return to what it once was when I was seen as a resource instead of a mother. The boundaries I had set reshaped not just how I lived, but how I saw myself. I was no longer the woman abandoned at a rest stop. I was the woman who stood up, took back control, and lived life on her own terms. Looking back over the past year, the contrast was stark. Then I'd felt betrayed, dismissed, and pushed to the margins of my own family. Now I felt free, peaceful, and surrounded by people who respected me. Americans have a saying: sometimes you have to lose something to gain everything. I had lost my old house, but I gained freedom, self-respect, and a life I truly loved. And now I want to ask you, the one watching this video, if one day you were treated like I was, abandoned on the side of the road, your kindness exploited, your worth dismissed after everything you'd done, what would you do? Would you stay silent, accept it, and keep letting others make the choices for your life? Or would you stand up, set boundaries, and reclaim control? I know everyone's answer will be different, but I believe that no matter which path you choose, the most important thing is to never let anyone else define your worth. Leave your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear your stories, your ideas, and your experiences, because who knows, your story might inspire someone else, just as I hope mine inspires you. Before I end, I want to leave you with this: life isn't always fair. There will be times when you're betrayed by the very people you trust most, but that's not the end of your story. It's just a comma, a pause to take a breath, stand up, and keep writing. And when you do, remember, you have the right to say no. You have the right to set boundaries. You have the right to live a life that doesn't depend on anyone else's approval. It took me years to learn this, but you don't have to take that long. This spring, as I planted a fresh row of tulips in the park with the green hands, my hands were covered in soil, but my heart felt light. Each bloom was a reminder that beauty can rise even after the harshest winter. And just like that, after my long winter of disappointment and betrayal, I finally found my own spring. If you're hearing this, I invite you to share. If it were you, what would you do? Leave your answer in the comments. And if this story touches you, share it so that someone out there knows they too can stand up, set boundaries, and live free as they deserve.